Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Digitally. I'm super excited today because I've got someone here really special that I think you'll enjoy listening to and speaking with, and that's Tom Davenport. Tom, welcome.
Thanks, Sanjay. Happy to be here.
For those of you that have not interacted with Tom before, you ought to know that he's the President's Distinguished Professor in Information Technology and Management at the Babson College. He's a visiting professor at the Said Business School at Oxford. He's a fellow of the MIT Initiative in the Digital Economy. He's a great friend, not just of myself, but I think of the digital community globally. And I happen to have followed Tom's work for a few years now. And most recently, we had an opportunity to work together. And so I want to actually go into that a little bit and talk a little bit about the work that Tom helped us think through, which is studying the evolution of technology in large corporations and the evolution of technology leadership in those organizations. And so with all of that, Tom, welcome. First things first, I've got to look at your background, and boy, that's a striking, I'm assuming, a virtual background. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, Sanjay, it's a little sad because I'm a visiting professor at the Oxford Said Business School, but I can't actually go there. So this is the closest I can come. Maybe someday they'll welcome me in real life. We'll see.
Well, the world has moved so much anyway, and we're doing so many things virtually. I think it's fantastic that we have the time with you and then also this amazing background. So thank you for that. Tom, look, without further ado, I want to actually jump into the heart of the topic here today. You know, you've done a really introspective look in working with the Sloan School at MIT and obviously with ourselves. And we've looked at about 500 CIOs across large enterprises globally, and you've spoken with many of them personally. And as I looked at the work that came out in the study itself, two things really struck me. One is that the role of the CIO and the technology leaders just seems to have changed so much. And then two, the tools of the trade that CIOs and CDOs are now bringing to the job have completely changed and evolved. And I thought we'd just take both of those topics and double click. And so on the first one, talk to us in your own words. I mean, you've tracked this for a while. What's happening as it relates to the leadership, the role of technology in large corporations?
Well, Sanjay, as you know, one of them, I think the central findings of our survey research and our interviews was that the CIO role has evolved so that really the most essential aspect of it, I think, is whether or not you're leading business transformation. And we found kind of a bell-shaped curve on that. About 20% said they are definitely leading business transformation, and we call those the pilots. And then about 60% said that they are partnering for business transformation. And of course, we call those the co-pilots. And the other 20% said, nah, I pretty much take direction from the rest of the organization about business transformation, but try to help it along a bit. So we call them the engineers.
Wow.
I don't know, there aren't too many flight engineers on airplanes anymore. Maybe that tells you something about what's going to happen to these CIOs.
I loved your the classification, partly because I'm an aerospace engineer by education, so I love the airplanes. I love the pilot, co-pilot, and the flight engineer terminology. Look, it struck me as you said that, though, is if I put the pilots and the co-pilots in one category, here are people that are taking advantage of technology and leveraging that and using that to transform the very businesses they serve. And they're either doing it directly and singularly, as the pilots might indicate, or they're doing it in concert and collaboration and deep partnership with other business stakeholders, but independent, they're actually leading the charge from the front. Not to minimize the role of flight engineers, I mean, it's a really important value delivery engine, that of IT in a corporation, and there's a job to be done. And I think that's really what the CIO role has been about for the longest time. And there's value in that, and there's some that actually continue to do that. But isn't the key finding here that over the years, we've seen a large shift from flight engineers to pilots and co-pilots?
Well, yeah, if you think that 80% of our sample really fell into that category, and I'm sure there are some differences between the pilots and co-pilots, but who cares really that whether they're leading it more or less on a solo basis or they are partnering. it all works out for the good of the organization. And I think we probably 10 or 15 years ago might have seen the exact opposite split, that only 20% would be leading or partnering for business transformation. So as you suggest, it's really come a long way.
And so that begs the very question in my mind of why now. And I'd love to get your perspective on, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it was a different play. Now it's a different play. Why? What's changed now?
I think a number of things have changed. One, we have more powerful technologies. We're going to talk about that are capable of creating business change. Two, I think the rest of the organization is much more familiar with what IT can do. Not everybody, but certainly a growing group. And so they expect somebody is going to take the lead in moving them forward through the use of these powerful tools. And who better than the chief information officer? So I think those are the two major reasons.
Yeah.
I don't know, what do you think?
Well, it makes sense, right? Because I think number one, the transformation itself has become an imperative for any corporation globally, just in the new normal and all of the disruption that's happening around us. And then technology and the capability that it delivers has come a long way. And I think there's a new realization that the new backplane for a corporation, for the entire value delivery engine, is now the technology backplane. And I think that puts both a tremendous responsibility on the technology leadership of a company to leverage that and to drive that, but equally an opportunity for people to think of their roles, not necessarily just as flight engineers, but as pilots and co-pilots, as you said it. So no, it's fantastic.
Right. Well, we did these surveys and interviews pretty much right after COVID, or at least the worst parts of the COVID pandemic. And I suspect that converted a few engineers into pilots or co-pilots. You didn't really have any choice if your organization wanted to continue working.
That's exactly right. So let's actually change gears. I want to come to the second kind of key observation I made as I read through the work that was done. And it had to do with the fact that there's almost a new toolbox that CIOs and CDOs are now bringing to play. And it felt like a lot of it was around cloud and data and artificial intelligence. And I want to pick your brain a little bit about those three areas and see what's changing, what's new, how should we think about it?
Yeah, the highest survey numbers were generally for analytics and advanced analytics and AI, which, as you know, are pretty similar. And those have been my enthusiasms over the past 10 or 15 years. So I can understand why people are excited. We were a little surprised that there wasn't more skepticism about them in terms of value, because a lot of data suggesting that companies are putting these systems in, but not putting them into production deployment and not getting a lot of value. But no, they still have faith and a lot of cloud activity. And to make all of this work, of course, you have to have a lot of data. So I think re-architecting and modernizing of the data environments is a big issue.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think data is clearly, at least in our business, turning out to be one of the largest drivers of transformative value. So I can see across the board, there's significant momentum around data. Cloud just happens to be, at least in my mind, more of an enabler than it's more of the journey than the destination. So it enables you to get to where you need to get to. It just happens that most of the innovation now is happening on the back of cloud and hyperscalers. And so if you want to tap into that, you need the right backplane for it. And I think that's actually driving that. But like you, I was super interested. I'm very passionate about AI as well, and somewhat pleased to see. I mean, there seems to be a real focus and a desire to invest more. And again, my mind goes to why now? And I don't know if you had a thought in some of your discussions as to what's driving the new focus in AI in the enterprise.
Well, part of it is, of course, all the data that we have, and we can't make sense of it without AI. And I think, continuing desire to sort of personalize the relationships we have with our customers and our employees and our partners and so on. These business models involving platforms, A, require AI, and B, to function, and B, are far more valuable in the marketplace than the previous business models. So it makes a huge amount of sense.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think what you're saying is data is now available in a consumable way for the first time in a big sense. And that's obviously the raw materials that drives I also think you're saying that actually the business environment has changed, the scale has gone up. You're making decisions at high velocity. You need the right augmented intelligence to make that happen. And AI techniques are improving by the day. And so I think that's probably why we're seeing that. It's just fantastic to see all of that, because it just talks to the great opportunity ahead for all of us. And so, how would you bring all of this together, Tom? How, if I'm an aspiring CIO listening in, if I'm an aspiring technologist listening to you, and I'm trying to chart my course and that of my company, what are your words of advice for me?
I think just define your job well beyond the IT management infrastructure, those horrible words, keeping the lights on, that just is not going to cut it anymore. You've got to change the business with all of these things.
Going from keeping the lights on and keeping the machine learning to really co-creating and building new business models for the corporation. What a great set of words, Tom. I just want to thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. This is a LinkedIn event, so you'll probably get a few questions in the back of that. And if you do, I'd love for you to just chime in a little bit. So thank you for that. Thank you to our audience, and we'll see you soon.